Hello, everyone. I'm Michael R., writer and TV reviewer at Den of Geek, and I've got some very special guests with me today who not only have some featured works here at the Boston Sci-Fi Festival, but these folks are also uniquely suited to address the topic of this panel, which is fandom. Fandom and all the ways that it ties into our identity and our shared entertainment interests and just basically a sense of community altogether to come together and inspire works of art and film, such as the films that all of my distinguished guests have created. So let me go ahead and introduce who we have here today. Let's start off with Eric McEver, who is the director of EK Boys, in which two guys use their knowledge of anime to survive in the fantasy world or a prophecy in which they find themselves wrapped up in. And also we have, welcome Eric. I'll give you a chance to say hello.
Hello, everyone. I normally am based in Tokyo. I'm actually in Paris right now having dinner. So if you hear music in the background and see me moving my lips, it's because I'm chewing and drinking. But it's a delight to be here, simulating being here in Boston. So forget what I just said. I'm actually in Boston. It's all part of the smoke and mirrors.
That's right, adding to the festive atmosphere. And we also have the co-directors of Alien on Stage, Danielle, Kummer, and Lucy Harvey. And this is a great documentary about a bus company, the drivers and some of the other staff, putting on a stage adaptation of Ridley Scott's Alien. And what a great documentary this is. So happy to have the two of you here today as well.
Hello, thank you for having us. Really great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to this.
And lastly, we have Phillip Lambert, who's a producer of the documentary Beyond the Wasteland, which is this global documentary, really grand scale, talking about the worldwide con culture and fan culture of Mad Max in all of its various iterations. Welcome, Phillip.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Now, we have different fandoms represented here on the panel today, and each of you has documentaries or films that kind of play into a different aspect of the fandoms that are addressed in your films. So let's start with Eric and go in the order that I introduced you here. What are some of the aspects of fandom that appear in your film?
Well, so it's interesting. I've been thinking about this. I think the fandom, as I see it, in sort of the roots of the film, is it's striving for and it's wanting to be in a bigger and wider world. I mean, I think a lot of it comes from a place of dissatisfaction with where you are, in a sense that there is something more exciting out there. So I mean, I think a lot of it comes from the fact that life is hard, and we all sort of want to escape into a bigger, what seems like a bigger, better life. So for my film, and I'll say my own life specifically, a lot of love of Japanese fantasy is rooted in a specific place, which may be what makes it unique. I mean, there actually is this country called Japan, which has created this wonderful animation and these wonderful giant monster films. So I can say in my own case, the fandom, it naturally leads to wanting to get to that actual place. I think that's not necessarily the case for all fans of Japanese media, or Japanese culture. I think, for some of them, it's sort of, yes, this comes from Japan, but the product arrives fully formed, and you can still escape into that magical world. But one way or another, it's this form of wish fulfillment. It's a form of getting someplace better. One of the things I try to explore in my film, though, is the idea of actually discovering that where you are isn't so bad, and that through the act of striving, through the act of dreaming, you actually discover that there's magic right here where you are. So I think when it's working well, good storytelling and good fandom can be a means of finding the magic and the beauty, whatever your circumstances happen to be.
And Danielle and Lucy, you guys had a different aspect of it because it wasn't necessarily tied into a hardcore fandom, but it became something a lot larger than perhaps the original players thought it might.
Yes. So our documentary follows this amateur dramatics group who are mostly made of bus drivers of the Wilson Dorset Bus Company. And the reason our documentary falls into your theme now is because that amateur dramatics troupe had only ever done one pantomime together, which is a traditional British comedy, quite kitsch, camp stage show, and wanted to do something else, and enlisted the help of the only script writer they knew, which was the son of one of the duty manager at the bus station. And he is a super geek, sci-fi, film buff, writing scripts about vast, intergalactic stories, and he declined writing a pantomime because it's just not what he likes, and gave them a list of kind of iconic films that he would like to adapt to the small stage for this very, very amateur group of bus drivers to perform. And they rested on Alien. And so it's his fandom that kind of infected the rest of them. Actually, it's him and his mum, because they've watched Alien together many, many times since Luke was a very young boy. So it was their fandom that kind of led the rest of them on the journey.
Yeah, and what was also interesting is when we were filming them, we found that not everybody in the group actually shared the love of sci-fi, and a lot
That's
of people
what I figured.
they were like, I don't really like sci-fi, or I haven't seen Alien, or it was kind of like this juxtaposition of mega fans and then people that were a bit indifferent, but just doing it for the love and for getting involved and for being part of the troupe, which is kind of nice, because I think in an audience as well watching our film, there'll be mega fans of Alien, but there'll also be people that are a bit, not sure, or they haven't seen it, or they're not, they're kind of on the fence. So it kind of covers both sides of that as well.
And lastly, I think the biggest one that deals with fandom is probably Beyond the Wasteland. So Phil, tell us a little bit about this great global phenomenon that has risen up around a very small budget film from your native land.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, quite amazing, really. So you go back to 1978 and George Miller and Byron Kennedy. George Miller's the director, Byron Kennedy, the producer, and they make this this film on a shoestring budget. It's about $300,000, which I suppose sounds a lot if it's if you convert it to today's dollars, but it really was not a lot of money. They rustled together a crew and the actors, etc., and they made this film, which, as you rightly say, has turned into this global phenomenon, which is absolutely phenomenal. So if you go back to there, then you fast forward over 40 years later, you've got a massive hit across the globe, and I'm talking most territories around the world really dig this franchise, and it hit a chord with a lot of cultures around the world, especially in Japan originally. So a lot of the motorcycles that George Miller used in the original Mad Max were the Japanese motorbikes, Kawasaki's, Yamahas, and the Japanese really connected with that. I suppose, you get a film coming out of somewhere like Australia, and they've used your vehicles, your motorcycles, and changed them to look like a post-apocalyptic motorcycle. You're going to attach to that pretty fondly and be proud of your culture that it's worldwide. And then from there, the huge hit in Japan led to the US, and then that became the huge hit in Japan and in the US, and then from there it just branched out across the globe. So we started exploring that a few years back, and the original premise behind this was we were friends with one of the original characters in Mad Max, and just a small part, and he unfortunately had leukemia, stage 4 leukemia, and then they were doing the 40th anniversary for this franchise down in Clunes, which is in Victoria, where I'm living now in Australia, and we were just going to follow him. Basically, he's going to get in his Trans Am. He's from France, a very flamboyant kind of Frenchman. We're just going to follow his journey. A lot of people are really into Bertrand Kadar, what's his name, and so he had a lot of fan-based people following him anyway. So we're going to just follow him down to the 40th anniversary. It's going to be a lot of fun and see what goes on with the fans. But Eddie, the director and the other producer, and myself, we started looking into this a lot more and realized how big this franchise really was across the world. So we thought, well, let's see if we can expand on this idea of following Bertrand and see what else is going on around the world. So in the end, we ended up filming in the US. We went to France, we went to Italy, and we went up to Japan as well and interviewed the fans through those countries, and then came back to Australia. And in the end, we've got this documentary of showing how big this franchise is. But it's not only the franchise, it's about the dedication these fans really do have towards not only the Mad Max franchise, but really towards keeping a passion alive within themselves. You know, one of our main characters, Tank, phenomenal guy, very inspirational, mid-40s to late 40s years old, but so into Mad Max and so into cosplay and so into just doing the artistic thing every week towards his passions. We often joke, sometimes, if you've got a poster up as a kid, as you grow older, we kind of take those posters down, and we don't have all those cool things as a child up in our house anymore. And they were just inspirational. And I started putting my posters back up and just really getting into this fandom fandom stuff in regards to films. And it reminded me myself of all the films I used to love and still do love. So yeah, it's an exciting journey for us.
And Mad Max is a perfect example of what I want the panel at large to address. And you guys can just jump in conversationally as you want to address this. And that's basically the fact that there's cosplay, there's collecting, there's other aspects of fandom that people use to express themselves with. So I'll quote from one of the characters in Eric's film, who says, "The geeks shall inherit the earth," or "Blessed are the geeks, for they shall inherit the earth." Because really, this kind of geek culture transcends an interest in sports, for example, or an interest in other hobbies that may have predated this modern geek culture that we have. So what do you think it is that about entertainment fandom that makes it different from just being like a fan of your local sports team?
I think it's almost like an innate, it's hard to explain really. I mean, even talking to these guys, we met this guy, Melvin in France, and he says quite fondly in the documentary, he said, I spent 10 years literally in my underwear writing a whole book about Mad Max for 10 years. He still hasn't finished the book. I think it goes back to your childhood, that's nostalgia, like I was saying before. I really felt that with our characters. On the front of it, they seem like they're almost showing off and look at me. But really, it's not about that. It's living, if I'm wrong, but living this inner child that a lot of us maybe forget about, like I said. And I think that's where at least the Mad Max fandom comes from. And also, making the vehicles, we'll probably talk about that later, but amazing amount of money these guys and girls spend on vehicles and doing things. But that's a big car culture in Australia, so that's probably a different topic as well. But it's definitely, I believe, it's something to do with your childhood, being a teenager.
And is that true?
Or at least keeping that alive. So, yeah.
I'm going to toss it to Eric here, because Eric, you were a fan growing up. Is that correct? What you just said about?
No, I'm not. No, I think it's a wonderful segue. And I guess I realized I didn't fully explain the plot of my film. I mean, it's semi-autobiographical. I mean, it's set at a little high school in a small town in Oklahoma, and the lead characters, basically, their escape from being geeky teenagers is Japanese culture. And thank you for so lovingly quoting the line in the film. But the subtext in that is, there was a time where geek was not a nice thing to say about a person. And I think rooted in fandom is this idea that you can be anything. And this is where, Phil, I think you're right on the money. It's the power of imagination and the childlike imagination where anything is possible. And I think, unlike sports or unlike, I guess other forms of human endeavor, this is something where it really it's the only limits are your imagination. And, the only limits are, what you dream it to be, what you make it to be. And so I think for a lot of people, so I think certainly, Japanese culture, it's something that in the West, there's enough familiar human elements that we can latch onto it, but it's something very different, and it's a different way of looking at the world. And so it becomes, it's something that it's like, it's interesting because it's like, it deals with adventure and fighting and death and all these things, but, big monsters and, all these things, but it's also kind of a safe zone. And I think it's interesting, even like you're talking about Mad Max. I mean, the setting for that is like horrible and brutal and nihilistic, but it's also about hope and all these other things. And I think escaping into that, it's a way of dealing with how hard life is. And I think the very little secret about childhood is, even if you have a happy childhood is hard. Kids are mean to you. Growing up is the pits. And escaping into an imaginary world is how we deal with the real world. So, yeah, I mean, it's the power of imagination.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got this nice section towards the end of the documentary that says pretty much what you're saying there. A lot of these wasteland, they call them Wastelanders, in the US. They have this massive festival every year to celebrate the post-apocalyptic genre and also Mad Max. And, a lot of them are saying, well, like, I do my 9-to-5 job during the week, and this gives me a sense of, I can feel free, I can feel like a kid again, I can be myself again. I'm part of a wider community. We interviewed a guy in Italy, Robbie, amazing person, very inspirational with how he lives his life. He said, it's an international community, and especially with something like Mad Max, and that's part of the phenomenon. It's not about box office sales, it's about the phenomenon of this film over 40 years ago, bringing a whole worldwide community together, which is absolutely amazing. And also, in regards to Mad Max, it really is a film they can actually live every day if they choose to do that. They can drive their car. I've got another guy, he drives his Interceptor, amazing looking car. We recorded it and filmed it down on a drag strip just to really give it that grandeur and highlight it. And he goes, I go get my lotto ticket on a Sunday. They love it, and he can dress in a leather jacket. The Japanese fans are over there saying, generally, you'll appreciate this, Eric, where, most of the time it's quite a conservative culture in a way, but these guys dress in their leathers, they cruise down the road in these big, V8 Interceptors, and they're looked at, right? Well, they go on their motorbikes and they look like the gangs, and they're kind of shy and bashful when they're telling this on camera. But they, inwardly they love it. They absolutely love it. And they can live it, like I'm saying. That is one film franchise or one fandom where you can live it. It's quite extraordinary.
One thing I noticed about Danielle's film, Alien on Stage, is that you kind of appeal to a broader scope of people who just know the film. So Danielle, talk a little bit about the Kickstarter and how it basically created this this situation that maybe you weren't even prepared for, much less the bus drivers themselves.
Situation, you mean in terms of the film?
Well, you kind of built your own fandom in a way for the documentary.
Yeah,
itself.
well, I think we built on, like, same with Mad Max. Alien is 40 years old, and the fan base is huge because it's got such a longevity of time, and people who watch the film even now who've not seen before, just it's such an amazing film. It just connects with so many people, and we were really lucky to be able to sort of piggyback onto that, and people who love the film really love the idea of a ragtag group of bus drivers putting it on stage and bringing it to London. And it's kind of just an amazing premise that we were just so fortunate enough to find. Lucy, do you want to speak about finding it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's already got an enormous fan base, and like Danielle says, it's such a quality film, and that it stood the test of time. And I think one of the reasons we went to see the show in Dorset in the first place was just because we already knew what an incredibly highbrow film Alien was, when it was made, like how sophisticated it was. So that made us just our minds boggled at how a group of bus drivers can put this on in a village hall. And that's what made us drive from London to Dorset especially to see this village hall show. And once we realised that what they'd created was just magical on so many levels, and really inspired me in the same way that Phil and Eric were talking about, that you were like, these guys basically all have full-time jobs which are very restrictive and mundane, and they chose collectively to put their spare time into doing something creative. And the thing about having a pre-existing piece of culture that everybody kind of knows quite well is it makes it very, very easy for a disparate group of people to come together, because they're already on the same page, and it's a piece of culture that's already got kudos and is well known, which is why they decided to do it. I mean, in their minds, they thought it would bring everybody to their village hall, but they just didn't realize they weren't in the right place, and the people around them had no interest whatsoever in their retelling of Alien. So it is about connecting the fans with the fans, and our presence and us witnessing their show meant that we became a conduit of connecting what they did with this wider fan base, which we knew already existed. So it was very easy for us to get people to come along and join them. And a lot of people that came to the West End show and filled the audience were, hardcore Alien fans. We got some amazing people show up out of the blue, just all drawn magnetically to this because it's Alien, and they're already invested. They're already cosplayers and things like that. So it's like having a shared faith. It's when you go to church and everybody knows the hymn and you can all sing it at the same time. It feels like that.
And we're
Well,
really
in that
lucky
sense,
that there's such a global reach. We've been able to, we'll be going to festivals all around the world. We've played in Russia and Australia and Italy, and it's just everywhere. Everybody knows Alien, so there's already a connection to the story, and people are just invested already, which is a great thing to have. And then on top of that, we've got a pretty amazing story, which is just these really wonderful group of people doing something really unusual, and the two together, it's like a big contrast, but they just work beautifully, and people seem to really connect with that.
Yeah, and I think people just really identify with the idea that we need to be creative, and we need to all sort of play and invest in our imagination, but it's very, very difficult to make the space for that. And fandom is like an easy way into a pre-existing world. If say, for example, the people in our documentary wanted to reinvent an entirely new fantasy world for themselves and then draw everybody in to play with them, it's very hard because nobody knows the rules. It's a self-indulgent thing. But if there's something already exists that everybody's already aware of, it's very easy to kind of like don the uniform and join in and play, because there's already a structure that people can get involved without having to create the entire thing from scratch themselves.
Well, and that's interesting too, because you all have an aspect of amateur expression that wouldn't necessarily be present at, say, a big convention where the professional cosplayers come or something like that. So I'm going to continue with the Alien on Stage, because there was a certain amount of laughter in the audience when this performance was being given, even though the Alien fans were probably appreciating it for this Rocky Horror Picture Show style of performance. Was there any worries on the part of the cast for the spoofing aspects of it rather than the honoring of the original material?
Do you want me to answer that, Danielle?
Sorry, I can go. I think there was an initial, a couple people were initially unsure of the reactions. I know the scriptwriter, he put so much effort and really wanted to be really serious. He really wanted to be a big, serious adaptation of Alien, and that was his, heart and soul. And then I think when he realized actually it's not going to quite be that, I think there was an initial maybe a bit of disappointment, but I think again he also realized that actually the entertainment value was so huge, and that is kind of part of what's really important to put on a show. People are entertained and people are enjoying themselves. Then he was able to really realize that that is just as valid as well. And I think it's important that people weren't laughing with them. It's just the juxtaposition of who they are and the material they're doing, and the fact that it's very low budget. It kind of just created this wonderful world that just meant that it was very entertaining, and just as with it as well, quite funny.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And just to say that up until the moment that my friend and I went to Dorset to see it, they genuinely felt that they were recreating the most serious adaptation of Alien they could, with as much drama as possible, smoke machines and lasers and, you know, special effects and blood. But while they were preparing the show, they had nothing but fun. Like we you know, we had access to their rehearsal videos and their technical rehearsals, trying to get the chest burster to work, and you know, they were just pissing themselves. I'm sorry for my terrible language. Grew up on a council estate. They were just hilarious. It was hilarious for them to go through the process together. So they were already having a lot of fun. But it wasn't until we came to see their representation of Alien and found it to be just hysterical, but also like awe-inspiring. So you were kind of laughing with joy at the fact that they'd still managed to pull it off, even though it was this very, you know, strange version of Alien that wasn't remotely scary, but still amazing and brilliant. And I think it wasn't until we approached them after the show that they it dawned on them. They're like, oh yeah, of course it's hilarious. How could it not be? And they just made a graceful adjustment to the idea that their show is magical and hilarious rather than terrifying and serious.
Well, actually, that is another good segue for you there, Eric, because I think we have, you know, associations with, you know, the kaiju monsters like Godzilla, the mecha robots like Voltron, and things like that, that they are very serious, but your film actually takes on the comedy aspects of it, even though the characters take it very seriously.
Yeah, well, I mean, so you know, what happens in the film is the lead characters, they're in high school and they watch this magical anime that supposedly is a prophecy about the year 1999 in which they're living, and the end of the world at the end of the millennium, and the heroes who will rise up and save it. And so, you know, these teenage kids, they transform into a kaiju, you know, a Japanese style monster, and a mecha, a Japanese style sort of robot powered hero, and also a Japanese goddess. And you know, so you know, the aesthetic, you know, with the suits are all practical. You know, they were, you know, they're handmade, and you know, it's done with very traditional, you know, Japanese special effects. Actually, you know, I mean, the final battle, I mean, it was done by a lot of veterans of the Godzilla series. And you know, and one thing that was very important to me was that the film be fun but not make fun of itself. You know, I think people who, I can say from experience, people who enjoy Japanese fantasy films, they don't watch them ironically. You know, it's a heightened reality to escape into. It's, you know, it's a bit like professional wrestling. And I think, you know, outside looking in, it's like, you know, oh, like these rubbery suits, so it looks ridiculous. But I knew it's like the film is going to fail the moment the film starts making comments about how ridiculous it is. And you know, for me, you know, what you're saying, Michael, about, you know, the teenage humor, I mean, the humor comes from the fact that, you know, when you're a child or, you know, a teenager, you know, you're deadly serious about things. And generally, you know, you sort of, you swing big, and, you know, as you try to get the girl, or you try to sort of, you know, rise the occasion and be a man, but, you know, you're going to fail along the way. And you know, and so the, you know, the humor comes from the fact that it's these kids who are, you know, they're trying hard, and you know, but they're still kids. You know, they're kids in monster bodies. So it's you know, it's just, it's the juxtaposition, but ultimately it comes down to just the truth of the situation.
And that's where I wanted to get back to you, Phil, about the car aspect of Mad Max, because, you know, the geek culture being what it is, I do think there are probably some similarities for people who bring their cars together into a parking lot and have done all these modifications to it even if it's nothing to do with Mad Max, there is a same kind of geeky culture to that. So talk about how those two different cultures came together in terms of not just souping up your car, but also having the costume to go with it.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously a big car culture in Australia back in the day. You know, you've got these big V8 cars over here that, you know, sucked a lot of gasoline, and a lot of people, you know, there's some nice sections in the documentary where, you know, they're talking about, you know, you remember your old man used to work on the car, you bore out the engine, put a different engine in, off you go out, and you almost race the other kid's father's car, you know, or you sneak out, steal cars. And it's like everything about the cars, and it's a big one over here, like Holdens versus Commodores, that kind of thing. So you have these massive cars, but then you have this oil crisis that happens, you know, in the 70s, and that's kind of where the Mad Max got its idea from, where they're fighting for, you know, oil, you know, for gasoline. You know, it's a big one. But then, and moving on from that, so in regards to the actual cars themselves, yeah, it's huge for the fans. So these cars were, you know, they really took a patrol car, a real police patrol car, back then in Australia, and you know, and George Miller modified it to become, you know, the main Interceptor car, and then you've got the yellow Interceptor as well. And from these cars, so people could copy these, but he changed the motorbikes as well. So this Bertrand Kadar, our friend, he ended up, the way he got his job and working on Mad Max is quite an interesting story with that. So he was actually working on fairings for the motorcycles. And George Miller approached him and said, you know, would you make these for us and make them look futuristic for these bikes? So every vehicle in Mad Max is modified. And as you go through the franchise, I mean, hopefully you saw Fury, an amazing film. Yeah. And look at the vehicles, you know, they're phenomenal, you know. And then you've even got the guitarist on the front of on one of the main vehicles. And, you know, so it's a lot of fun. But a lot of fans related to that, especially from Australia originally, because of the culture of cars, because they had identified with Mad Max, because of the vehicles, they could modify these vehicles, and they still do it now. And we capture a lot of that in the documentary of how these guys,
and of course the Kawasaki,
you know,
the motorcycles as well from Japan.
These vehicles. It's amazing. You know, we've got the premiere coming up as well, and yeah, a lot of cool vehicles coming down to the premiere. We're having it in a drive-in, so you know, it's a really good way to show this kind of film. So it's pretty exciting. But yeah, so the vehicles are huge for Mad Max because of the car culture originally. And then around the world, they start emulating the same kind of passion, I guess.
Yeah, and the Kawasaki motorcycles too. You talked about that because that was a way to bring in another culture. So talk about how it went from how does the fandom spread from a small movie making business in Australia to Japan and then to the US? Like, how did that journey occur in terms of fandom spreading it?
Even sometimes I think the filmmakers themselves don't quite understand that phenomenon originally, you know. But it wasn't a big success in the US originally.
No.
Australian accent, not quite right. In the US, they changed Mel Gibson's accent to an American overdub. Mm-hmm. It's quite amazing when you think about it now. But it was really, like you were saying, it's the Japanese part it played massively into the success of Mad Max because of the motorcycles. So you have these Kawasaki's, and they're relating to that. So, and like I said earlier, where the Japanese saw this film, they related to this film in regards to the motorcycles, but it wasn't only a motorcycle effect of the film. It was also, they related to the story part of the film. So in Japan, and George Miller says this, where they related to the samurai part of the story. You've got this lone character seeking revenge against the gangs or you know, the baddies as such. You know, it's an age-old story, you know. And also in Europe, they relate to, you know, or in America at least, eventually they related to the West, the Wild West. Same kind of thing, you know. You've got this lone guy coming into the town to sort it out, you know what I mean, and seeking revenge. So it's that, again, like I was saying, the age-old story. And we relate to that a lot in the documentary. We've got a lot of references to that and how the story became very popular as a worldwide story. And that can be seen through a lot of films, a lot of literature, etc. Just storylines that we all relate to. Probably back to Shakespeare and even earlier. Yeah.
You actually have actors that probably, if things had gone in a traditional route, might have just moved on with their careers or stopped acting altogether and never thought about Mad Max again. And so in that sense, it is possible for the actors themselves or the people that are involved behind the scenes to get sucked right into the fandom themselves. So who are some of the folks that happened to?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Through the whole experience. So we've got two characters, and again, they were treated like rock stars in Japan. You know, you got Roger Ward and you got Paul Johnson, and they played Fifi and Candellini in the original Mad Max. And you know, to them, they probably didn't get paid a lot of money. They just go along and act. They were actors anyway. But when it went big, especially in Japan, as we keep saying, it really was that trigger for the rest of the world through Japan. These guys have been going there ever since. It's absolutely amazing. And they say, you know, we're treated like rock stars. It's amazing. You know, the fans weeping on you. I can't believe you're here. Or, you know, can you imagine going to a place in a foreign culture and they're dressing like you and they filmed 40 years ago? You know, some of these people were only like 5 years old, you know, when it first came out. You know, it's not even quite my generation. I was, you know, it's too young. I wasn't even born actually. But yeah, so just amazing. And even for Eddie and myself, I like Mad Max. You know, I like the grittiness of Mad Max. My generation was the Thunderdome kind of generation, more in the later 80s. But when I met all these fans and I became, I felt like even myself becoming part of it, I thought, oh, I think I should be dressing up, or I really want to be part of this suddenly. And you really get sucked into it in a very, very positive and good way, you know. So
have you not dressed up yet?
It's an exciting thing, and to see, like you're saying, just some of these actors, and it's just spread out across the globe, and they're known. I don't want to ruin the documentary in parts, because there's so many fun parts in the documentary, but you might realize, you know, Roger Ward. I won't give it away, but he goes somewhere. He goes to a very, very foreign country, and the person serving him recognizes him from Mad Max. It's actually unbelievable. You know,
What were you about to say there, Danielle? You were commenting.
Oh no, I was just curious if you had ever dressed up, if they'd got you in an outfit at all.
Oh, me myself?
Yeah, if you're hanging around with them.
No, I didn't actually make it on camera, apart from, you know, in a drone shot at the 40th anniversary. But no.
Maybe for the premiere, you need to don a bit of an outfit.
Oh, yeah, we're thinking about doing it. Yeah.
Speaking of which, Danielle, did they have any folks showing up in the West End in costume for that one night only performance?
He didn't wear a costume, but we did have a guy who does go around as a professional xenomorph. And he actually, there's a shot of him in the documentary. There's a shot with him, Sigourney Weaver. She's giving thumbs up next to him. So,
I'm sorry. What is a professional xenomorph? Please unpack that.
I guess he goes to like conventions and things dressed as them, but he didn't.
Is he like insanely skinny, or what? Like,
can I interject there for a second, Danielle?
Yeah, of course.
That there were a few people in the audience that were in like Wayland Yutani, you know, like shirts and alien related costumes, but that weren't too outlandish. But the guy that Danielle's talking about, who's the professional xenomorph, had a latex suit especially made. He actually requested if he could turn up to the West End show in the audience, and the Dorset bus drivers asked him if he would kindly not do so, because it would upstage their handmade xenomorph.
And theirs was quite good too.
Good. And there's a really beautiful exchange at the end where the the props maker who designed the xenomorph and all the special effects came face to face with the professional cosplayer called Abe T. Alien and completely geeked out because he knew nothing about Alien until he started making this costume, and then found Abe T. Alien on the internet and kind of like followed him for a bit. So he was awestruck when he finally got to the real Abe T. Alien had turned up to see his alien xenomorph costume, and he was full of praise for our Pete prop designer because he'd made it from scratch on a budget, and he just said he wouldn't have it any other way. But he himself has paid somebody like thousands to make him a latex xenomorph so he can go and hobnob with all the geeks and the stars of Alien. So yeah, that was quite a special moment in our documentary.
Yeah, it was a lovely moment of equal admiration of both of them, really admiring the other one's work. It's very sweet.
Well, I
So
noticed
I'll,
you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to throw in, so Phil, you were talking about, the actors sort of, getting sucked into the fandom. So, as much as I could, I tried to put in, Easter eggs in this film for, fans of anime and Japanese culture. So one of the lead characters is played by an actress, Yumiko Shaku, who's, so she's quite famous in Japan. So early 2000s, she was the pilot of Mechagodzilla in a couple of films, so it's a little in joke to have her in this, but she was just sort of, Phil, to your point, she was just delighted that there was this American from who here was in Japan and was like knew that she was in this Godzilla film and wanted her to be in an American film, and so that was just this sort of sweet point of connection. What was interesting for me, and this connects to the fandom, is so she was in a Japanese TV special last year. It was The Women of Godzilla, and it was like it was actresses who were heroines in different Godzilla films, and she sent me this message. It's like, Eric, I need your help. Like, please give me advice about Godzilla because I was in these films, but I haven't seen all 30 plus of them. So like, give me some advice about the series. And that was a very sort of sweet, full circle fan moment for me. That and because a wonderful collaborator, in the film, her performance is just fantastic, and it was neat to see sort of how delighted she was that I had enjoyed her work, in this, this big fan series. But then how that sort of, how that led to a friendship, and then how sort of my knowledge as part of the fandom was able to help her. So it's just, I think that's one of the interesting things about this is how, and I think one of the most telling things about this is just how this passion brings people together. And brings people together in really unexpected ways. And that's, we can talk about toxic fandom, but I think at its best, this really brings out the best people, the best qualities in people. And that's, that's where this really works well.
Yeah, and I think that speaks well to your film in particular, Eric, because I think about how it's really all about non-judgmental. And like you said, there are people like, for just as an example, in the Star Wars fandom that wants things a specific way, and anybody else who doesn't want it that way is seen as wrong, and you have to attack them. But in anime in particular, I'm thinking of the fact that you've addressed the fact that kaiju and mecha are often against each other, but in your movie they have to come together in a way. So are the fans of different subgenres of anime kind of supportive of each other in that way too? In terms of, you might like mechas, I'm not a big fan of that, but I like this other aspect of it a little bit more. And do they support each other?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think one of the things about fandom in Japan, and then this is where actually, I mean, kind of the interesting. The weird commonalities between American fandom and Japanese fandom is, I think Japan has produced so much interesting, pop culture that people tend to select their tribe. And, certainly in Japan, it's kind of like, I am fans of this. And it's like, I am into this thing and I'm going to sort of bore down and define my identity with this. and sort of there can be sort of an interest and an acceptance of other fandoms, but there's a lot of pressure to sort of, you know, choose where you are. So
Choose a lane.
I think one of the things yeah, I mean, one of the things I was trying to get at was saying, well, you know, you can switch lanes and you can, you know, get back into the lane you were in before. I don't know. I mean, it's, you know, I think it's like anywhere else. People are people. Sometimes they're cool and sometimes they aren't. And I think, you know, unfortunately, the worst can come out of people. But I do think more often than not, fandom brings out the best in people. You know, I mean, I'll say from experience. I mean, my best friends in the world, I've met because of being a fan, because of being interested in stories, interested in art. So I think you hear about the bad cases because, you know, because they're ugly, and you know, it's like reading the newspaper. You always put the bad news up front on page one, but most of it is good news. And I think more often than not, it brings people together rather than dividing people.
Well, and I want to talk about convention culture next, because my first convention experience was a video game experience, and that has its own fandom that's similar to the ones we're talking about today. But the next one after I became a father was anime conventions. There's a local one nearby that my daughter was very much into, and that's where I really started to see what you were talking about, Eric. The very supportive. I've never seen such well-behaved, massive crowds before in my life as at that anime convention. And then I've gone on through my work at Den of Geek to attend larger comic book conventions and fan conventions. And those have that same atmosphere, but it's kind of compartmentalized. So I have to ask, is there anything that you guys have experienced in that vein? Conventions, maybe some of the festivals that you've attended to show your film at, that has people coming up to you that show that fan support in these big festival and convention settings?
Yeah. I mean, when we were trying to raise money for the Kickstarter, I found myself going to mega conventions that I didn't even know these things existed on this scale. I went to Comic-Con in London at Wembley. I couldn't believe the scale of the convention and the level of detail in the costumes that people had put together to go and be part of this 2-day convention. And at first I was overwhelmed. I was like, this is insane. Like, everything's here. But then eventually I realized that everyone was so supportive. Like, I managed to stop dozens of people in costume to watch the trailer of our film and then do a little piece to camera for us to support our Kickstarter. And we went to any stand that was alien related, and we got given free pieces of art, of like drawings of xenomorphs, and people offering to, you know, come and be part of the production if they get to if they go to the West End again. Like, just really, really lovely, excited people who were just having a nice time and enjoying themselves. And I found that to be quite, I actually was like, I'd like to come back to this. This is actually really good fun. Rather than, and I think my idea was, oh, maybe this is a little bit obsessive and avoidant. You know, like, is this an avoidant culture that kind of like generates an obsessive tendency? But I actually found the energy to be really up and open and friendly and yeah, creative.
So I'll say in the Godzilla fan community, Godzilla versus Megalon is widely regarded as one of the worst in the series. There's a lot of derision leveled at it. I will tell you, however, I was at a concert in Japan a few years ago. This is a full orchestra in Tokyo, and they played the Jet Jaguar Punch 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 theme song. It's not a full orchestra in the film, I should add, but there was this full orchestra playing it. So, I mean, I think that's a case of something that has had a lot of hate level at it, and it's getting a massive amount of love and money. And so, yeah, I mean, I think fandom, more often than not, it brings out love. I mean, it brings out real love and real acceptance. I mean, I think, it goes back to what we're saying at Geeks. It's like, I think a lot of this is, it's a safe place to escape into. And I think, again, I think when it's functioning well, I think we all understand that it's like, this is a zone where we can go and, escape from the harsh realities of the world, but also hope that, like, through this, we can make the world a little better. Maybe the world won't be as harsh as we think it is. So it's, I don't know, like, it brings out the best in people.
And Phil, your conventions show up actually in your documentary itself. Were those your first
Wasteland weekend? Well, what can I say? Just watch the doco. Or actually, no, sorry, go on YouTube and type in Wasteland Weekend USA, and you'll see exactly what we're talking about. It's a phenomenal thing. And
had you had experience with it before yourself, though? I mean, had you done conventions prior to making the film?
No, not at all. No, I actually, a long time ago, I'm confessing something here. I worked at a convention, and I was just as one of the Dragon Ball Z characters, So when I had more hair and I could do the thing, right? But yeah, it was exciting, and I had my Dragon Ball Z T-shirt on. I wore that a lot in my 20s, actually. I really enjoyed that. But as far as conventions, no. We get a lot in Melbourne, get things going on. But like Lucy was saying, it's the detail to the costuming. It's absolutely amazing. Just, and that documentary, and even the cars. I mean, you've got this big vehicle, and the detail going on to the vehicle. They're not just grabbing, any old V8 and painting it black and putting big tires on it and putting, a turbocharger on the front. These guys are pausing the movie and copying everything they can do to these vehicles, to the costuming, and
or a dog food can, right? I mean, looking at the dog food can that Mel Gibson was eating from.
That's exactly what we're talking about. Like, you must have enjoyed Tank. Great guy, like, absolutely amazing to meet him, and so inspirational, like I said. But the detail this guy goes to, I mean, he'll, as you know, right, just detail on his costuming, and he searches on eBay and gets the exact boot that Mel Gibson wore. He even talks about, getting the heavy lug, because that's really important to him to get it exact, and he's talking about, I've nailed it, like, at least I've really become the fan I need to be. And it's almost, he's a very competitive guy, he's black belt karate, for example. We film a bit of that. This guy is a big guy, right? So he dresses, he cosplays Lord Humongous. If you don't know Lord Humongous, look it up. It's the main henchman villain in Mad Max 2, ex-bodybuilder, and Tank pulls it off unbelievably. I mean, people actually, you believe he is the original Lord Humongous when he's dressed up in cosplay. And he's half naked, he's basically wearing a G-string and a mask. It's great, but everything, the details, just absolutely amazing with these people, crazy. And even one of the Japanese fans, Yoshi, again, great guy, went to see him in Japan, saw him out in the desert, of all places over here in Silverton, where they shot Mad Max 2. He's got the replica of, there's a burnout bike, so they do these donuts in Mad Max, in the original Mad Max. He's got a replica in Japan, and he's got a replica in Australia. Like, that just says it. And it's amazing.
So I'm also an Indiana Jones fan. So this is not, Japan related, but I have for years and years I've been wearing the Indiana Jones leather jacket. I've actually got, I don't know if this you can see the sleeve here. It's draped in the chair in front of me. But actually, so I was at Boston SciFi a couple of years ago with a different film, and I was wearing my coat and just walking down the road to the festival, and just a gentleman on the street complimented me on the coat, and then he was like, "Oh yeah, and you've got the snaps in the right place and all this," and it's like we ended up, we befriended one another. We ended up talking, and now we're exchanging messages about the fifth film, and it's like, I mean, literally meeting a random person on the street, and now we're friends. And it's, that, it's that attention to detail. It's that sort of that extreme specificity, and brought us together. And, you know, it's, you know, to your point, Phil, it brings people together, and that's a really, really wonderful thing.
Okay,
Yeah,
we've got
an
Dragon.
easy connection for people, isn't it? You know, it's quite amazing. It's like, you know, you meet some people and, you know, I love my movies. I love my movie quotes. You know, I can pretty much do Pulp Fiction all the way through. And there's that connection straight away. You could just say one line, you guys are connected forever. And it's the same thing with the film, costuming, whatever part of it is, even away from films, just the fandom. And it connects us all, like you said. It's a great community. And everybody has it, and everybody should embrace it a lot more. But you know, people get distracted in life, I guess. But yes, it's definitely inspirational. It sounds like everybody's doing inspirational things with our project. So yeah, it's amazing.
You guys anticipated my next question, which was, what fandoms are you yourselves a part of? But we haven't gotten to Danielle and Lucy yet, so we have to ask them their secret fandoms.
I grew up absolutely loving musicals. That's probably the closest, but that's quite a broad genre. I don't know if I'm really geeky about one particular thing. I'm trying to think.
I'll share I have a prop here from the TV show 12 Monkeys.
Oh
Wow.
Appeared on SciFi. This is an original set prop. So I've got my stuff around the area.
Yeah, I think that existed for me when I was a lot younger. But I tend to transcend and move around quite a lot. I'm just a fan of popular culture. I lectured in design and visual culture, so I'm just a fan of the power of popular culture. But I did have a massive moment when Danielle and I were at the Bournemouth Comic-Con convention, and there was somebody dressed as Big Bird, and I went mental. I literally couldn't be more excited, and I felt I lost it, and my heart just exploded, and I ran to this giant Big Bird, and I was hugging him and loving him, and just be like, "Oh my God, it's Big Bird!" And I was like, "That's like the biggest fan geek out thing I've ever had in my life, was a guy dressed as Big Bird." So yeah,
I didn't know it existed until you saw them. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of Sesame Street, early Sesame Street. I mean, I could geek out on that for hours.
Amazing.
Well, I'll tell you guys, it's been such a joy to talk to you all about your different projects and just the topic of fandom. It's one of those fascinating topics that you could go on and on about. Once again, it's Eric McEver, director of EK Boys. Lovely, lovely film that just highlights some of the best aspects of that fandom that you could get from the main character's point of view. We've got these wonderful documentaries, Alien on Stage, from Danielle, Kummer, and Lucy Harvey. And Phil Lambert is the producer of Beyond the Wasteland documentary about Mad Max and the culture behind it. So thank you so much, guys, for joining me today.
Thank you for having us. It was fun.
And you can buy tickets to see any of these films at bostonsci-fi.com. And hopefully you've been able to enjoy some of this at the convention if you've got your tickets. Otherwise, if you're joining us on YouTube, Google it right away.
Yeah, and if you want to extend the fandom to our Dorset bus drivers, you can follow us on Alien on Stage Doc. And if you have anything positive to say, that there are a lot of them on there waiting for people to kind of reach out so they can enjoy the continued fan exchange, fan to fan exchange.
Anybody else want to share some socials?
You can check us out Beyond the Wasteland documentary. Check that out on Facebook, and either just Google it. It's pretty easy to find.
EK Boys just signed a domestic distribution deal, and socials will be forthcoming. So in the meantime, I will say all of you who are in Boston, I believe 9 p.m. on Thursday is when it's screening. So please come see it there, but more big news to come. So just remember the name EK Boys. Awesome. And I'm Mike SciFi on Twitter and at Den of Geek. So if you want to follow me there and follow some of my television reviews. But other than that, we're going to bid you adieu and have a great time at the Boston Sci-Fi Festival. Arigato.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks so much.